Soft spring sunlight filtered through the budding trees of Virginia's countryside as the armies of North and South prepared for what would become one of the Civil War's most daring and devastating campaigns. It was April 1863, and on one side stood Major General Joseph Hooker's Army of the Potomac, a rejuvenated force of more than 130,000 men, newly disciplined and eager. On the other, General Robert E. Lee commanded the Confederacy's Army of Northern Virginia, just over 60,000 strong but burning with audacity. Hooker, having reorganized his leadership, purged outdated strategy, and revitalized morale, had embarked on his mission with confidence. His winter months had seen improvements in camp sanitation, nutrition, and intelligence gathering. A new Bureau of Military Information that gave him eyes in the air and across the field. He declared to his staff, "My plans are perfect. May God have mercy on General Lee, for I will have none." His strategy was bold, a double envelopment that would strike the Confederates from east and west. Major General George Stoneman would lead a large cavalry raid deep into Lee's supply lines, while 3 corps, nearly 42,000 infantry, would stealthily cross upriver, swinging south to threaten Lee's flank. Meanwhile, another corps would hold visible positions, and 2 corps under Hooker's own command would remain near Fredericksburg, ready to envelop Lee's right. The plan relied on surprise, secrecy, and swift movement. By April 27th, Hooker's main force was drifting across the Rappahannock and Rapidan rivers like a vast shadow shifting into place. Enemy pickets gave little resistance. By April 30th, around Chancellorsville, nothing more than a crossroads and a large brick inn, Hooker had assembled a force of roughly 70,000, his headquarters under the sloping roof of the Chancellor family mansion. Lee, entrenched along the Rappahannock at Fredericksburg, could ill afford to let himself be ensnared. He had already been surprised once that spring, his supply lines vulnerable. Yet he did the unthinkable. He split his smaller army in the open. Leaving a portion behind to guard against John Sedgwick's corps at Fredericksburg, he marched the bulk, nearly 40,000 men, west to meet Hooker on May 1st. On that day, despite initial advantage, Hooker faltered. Confident that Lee would withdraw, he advanced along 3 roads, pushing into the dense secondary forest known as the Wilderness. But on that tangled ground, Union numbers counted for less. Lee struck back fiercely, and Hooker, unnerved, ordered a withdrawal into defensive entrenchments near Chancellorsville, the initiative slipping from his grasp. Within the dim woods, a pivotal council took place under the flicker of lantern light. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and J.E.B. Stuart, the Confederate cavalry commander, conferred under low-hanging branches. Jackson proposed a daring flank march, a 12-mile sweep south and east past Hooker's unguarded right. Hooker, confident, entrenched at Chancellorsville, had made no preparation to defend the flanks, relying on narrow lanes and an invisible assumption of security. With the break of dawn on May 2nd, Jackson and his 28,000 men began the cloaked march. Spiriting away through forested ridges, they avoided detection until late afternoon. When Union cavalry scouts reported something stirring, Hooker sent orders, too late, to extend pickets and probe westward. It was a hesitation that cost him dearly. By 5 p.m., the Confederate Corps struck. The 11th Corps, a motley force of German immigrants, political soldiers, and worn recruits, sat unprepared on the Orange Turnpike. Their commander, Major General Oliver O. Howard, had dismissed all warnings. The woods were impenetrable, and nothing could come through en masse. So, when Jackson's volleys crashed into their lines, the Union soldiers, many enjoying supper, were stunned. The rebel yell pierced the hush, animals fled, and artillerymen abandoned their guns. Officers, including Carl Schurz and Hubert Dilger, rallied a few pockets of defense, But the onslaught was relentless. Artillery positions overturned. Cannon spat hot lead into Union ranks. Within minutes, the 11th Corps collapsed in chaos, tumbling back toward the Chancellor Mansion like living debris. Hooker, roused by the tumult, mounted his horse and rallied what he could. But the line had shattered. At Hazel Grove, 3rd Corps Cavalry under Major Pennock Huey rode toward the fray, only to clash with Rhodes's division and retreat. Farther south, the 12th Corps hastily assembled defensive lines, buying time. But by nightfall, Jackson's corps had advanced over a mile, closing the net around Chancellorsville. In the midst of this triumph, tragedy struck the Confederacy's commander. Stonewall Jackson, ever bold, rode forward that evening to scout the line and direct movements toward renewed attack. Under the light of the full moon, he and his staff encountered Confederate pickets who misidentified them as Federal horsemen. 3 bullets found Jackson. 1 shattered his left arm. His arm was later amputated. The man acclaimed as Lee's right arm was now wounded, vulnerable. His soldiers bundled him off the field. Confederate artillery that evening unleashed a counter-barrage that further wounded A.P. Hill, Jackson's second-in-command. Jackson would survive but succumb to pneumonia on May 10th. In one swift moment, the South had lost its most aggressive, inspirational leader, and Lee's army was left diminished at its center. But Lee pressed on. May 3rd dawned with a reunited army of Northern Virginia arrayed in 2 wings around Chancellorsville. Hooker, suffering concussion from a cannon blast just before dawn, lingered in his tent, dazed and infirm. Meanwhile, Major General A.P. Hill assumed command of the 2nd Corps, though he too would be wounded. J.E.B. Stuart, originally cavalry, impressed in command of infantry, held the line. By 5:30 a.m., Confederate artillery from Hazel Grove and the Plank Road pummeled Union fortifications. Heth, Colston, Rhodes, Confederate divisions moved forward under murderous fire. Union artillery, though stout, was outmatched. Union lines wavered. Ammunition waned. By mid-morning, Fairview and Hazel Grove had fallen to the Confederates. The salient collapsed. Hooker ordered a withdrawal toward United States Ford. Simultaneously, but perhaps too late, Sedgwick had broken through at Fredericksburg. On May 3rd, his 6th Corps crossed the river, surmounted Mary's Heights, drove Confederates across town, and aimed westward along the Plank Road. But his advance faltered at Salem Church, offering hold by a small Confederate force reinforced by McLaws and Anderson into the evening. The fighting that day, across Chancellorsville, Fredericksburg, and Salem Church, claimed more than 21,000 lives and injuries. The second bloodiest day in American history, behind only Antietam. Lee held his ground. On the night of May 4th, Sedgwick began his retreat back across the Rappahannock, a withdrawal completed before dawn. Hooker, stunned, convened a council on May 5th. Though his commanders urged him to stand fast, he ordered the army to recross the river at U.S. Ford on the night of May 5th to 6th. Thus ended the campaign. On May 7th, Stoneman's Cavaliers, weary and largely unsuccessful, returned east of Richmond, the raid having yielded little. By now, both armies had resumed positions across the Rappahannock, mirroring their spring alignment. When the smoke cleared, the toll was staggering. Northern losses totaled over 17,000. Southern losses were around 12,700, a staggering 22% of Lee's engaged force. Lee himself said he felt no triumph. "We gained another victory. Our people were wild with delight. I, on the contrary, was more depressed than after Fredericksburg," he said. Lee's right arm had been severed in Jackson's injury, and the army its fiercest spirit. Hooker was consumed by blame. He dismissed Stoneman, vilified Howard and Sedgwick, and later recounted his own failure to reinforce Sedgwick as the key lapse. Lincoln lamented that the Confederate victory could have ended the war, lamenting, "When Hooker failed to reinforce Sedgwick, I do not know that I could have given any different orders. I might run away." Hooker himself would be replaced just weeks later. Lincoln relieved him on June 28th, a successor to lead into Gettysburg. In the South, Jackson's death forced Lee to reorganize, dividing his army into 3 corps under Longstreet, Ewell, and Hill, a structure that cost coordination in the next campaign. Lee's confidence, however, soared. Victory at Chancellorsville reinforced the myth of his invincibility, a conviction that would guide his fateful advance into Pennsylvania. In the years after, the battlefield invited reflection and preservation. The Chancellor Mansion, burned and rebuilt, became the symbol of memory. In 1927, Congress created the Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park, safeguarding thousands of acres. In the early 2000s, when development threatened sacred ground, citizens rose, candlelit vigils, community surveys, and legal appeals to preserve over 1,300 acres of the historic terrain. And so Chancellorsville endured, not simply as a tactical victory or a moment of tragedy, but as a crucible where high command, bold maneuver, heroism, and fate collided. It was Lee's masterpiece, Hooker's undoing, Jackson's Pyrrhic moment, a campaign that shaped destinies on both sides and set the stage for the bloodiest summer of conflict that lay ahead.